Commander Jake Morrison stood in the grand throne room of the Keltheran Empire. His boots made soft sounds on the polished marble floor as guards led him forward. The room stretched high above him, covered in gold and precious stones that caught the light from 1,000 floating crystal lamps. Everything here spoke of wealth and power that had never been tested. Jake kept his back straight and his face calm, though inside he felt tired. He had been traveling for 3 weeks to reach this planet, carrying Earth's desperate plea for help. His uniform was clean but worn, patched in places where plasma fire had burned through. The medals on his chest told a story of survival rather than glory. At the far end of the room sat Princess Queen Xylera on her throne. She looked young, maybe 30 years old by Earth standards, though Jake knew the Keltherans aged differently. Her skin had a pale blue tint that marked her royal bloodline. She wore robes made of fabric that seemed to change color as she moved. Jewels covered her arms and neck, each one probably worth more than Jake's entire ship. Around the throne stood dozens of nobles and advisors. They wore fancy clothes and looked at Jake like he was something strange and amusing. Some whispered behind their hands. Others simply stared with expressions that mixed curiosity and contempt. Jake had seen that look before. It was the look of people who had never really suffered, who thought their technology and wealth made them untouchable. He had hoped the Keltherans would be different, but standing here now, he felt that hope fading. The guard captain announced him in a voice that echoed through the chamber. Commander Jake Morrison of the Terran Coalition, representing the planet Earth and her colonies. Xylera leaned back in her throne and studied Jake with eyes that reminded him of violet gemstones. She did not stand to greet him. She did not even nod. Instead, she examined her fingernails, which glittered with embedded crystals. "So," she said, her voice carrying easily across the silent room, "Earth sends us a warrior to ask for our help." She looked up at him then, and her lips curved into a smile that held no warmth. "Tell me, Commander Morrison, exactly how many battles have you fought?" The question hung in the air. Jake heard quiet laughter from some of the nobles. They thought this was entertainment, he realized. They thought he was here to beg and grovel for their mighty empire to save weak little humanity. Jake met her gaze without blinking. 347, Your Majesty." The throne room became so quiet that Jake could hear his own heartbeat. Even the Princess Queen's smile disappeared. She sat up straighter, her casual pose forgotten. "That's impossible," Xylera said slowly. She leaned forward, studying his face as if looking for signs of a lie. "You appear to be, 40 of your Earth years? How could one soldier fight in 347 battles?" "Humanity counts battles differently than you do, Your Majesty," Jake replied. His voice stayed level and respectful, but he did not look away. "We don't just count wars or major campaigns. We count every single time we face death and somehow live through it. Every engagement where the outcome could have gone either way. Every moment when we had to choose between fighting and dying." Behind Jake, his second officer, Lieutenant Maya Rodriguez, stood at attention. She had been with Jake for 6 years now, fighting beside him through some of the worst combat humanity had seen. She knew what those numbers meant. Each battle was a story. Each number represented friends lost and enemies defeated. Her own count stood at 73 battles, and she was only 32 years old. A tall nobleman in purple robes stepped forward from the crowd. His face showed offense and anger. "Your Majesty, this is clearly an exaggeration. No soldier could survive so many engagements. The human is either lying or counting minor skirmishes as battles to inflate his importance." Other nobles nodded in murmured agreement. They wanted to believe Jake was lying, he realized. The truth made them uncomfortable. Xylera raised one hand and the murmuring stopped instantly. She stood from her throne and walked down the steps toward Jake. Even in her elevated shoes, she barely reached his shoulder, but something in the way she moved commanded respect. Up close, Jake could see intelligence in her eyes despite her youth and arrogance. "Explain yourself, Commander," she said. "How does a species that has only been traveling between stars for 50 years produce soldiers with such extraordinary combat experience?" Jake took a slow breath. This was the moment he had been dreading. How could he make these people understand? They lived in an empire that had not known real war for 200 years. Their ships were beautiful works of art. Their soldiers trained for parades and ceremonies. They had forgotten what it meant to fight for survival. "Your Majesty, humanity's home planet Earth is harsh," Jake began. "Not just in nature, but in history. We spent thousands of years fighting each other. We created weapons capable of destroying our entire world. We nearly used them, more than once. Even after we reached the stars, we kept fighting. Pirates, rebels, civil wars, first contact incidents that went wrong. We fight because we've never known anything else. That sounds barbaric, Xylara said, though her tone suggested curiosity rather than judgment. It is barbaric, Jake agreed. But it also means that when we face a real threat, we know how to respond. We don't panic, we don't freeze. We fight, because that's what humans do. It's built into who we are. He pulled a small device from his pocket, a datapad that held information he had brought from Earth. I've come to warn you about the Zarthak swarm. They're consuming everything in their path. 43 colony worlds have fallen. 60 million people dead. Your empire sits directly in their path, Your Majesty. They'll be here within the year. Xylar's expression shifted. The playful mockery disappeared, replaced by something harder to read. Our military advisors have reviewed the reports about this swarm. They assure me our defenses are adequate. Oh. Your advisors are wrong, Jake said flatly. The throne room erupted. Nobles shouted in outrage. Guards stepped forward, hands moving toward their weapons. The purple-robed nobleman's face turned dark with anger, but Jake did not back down. He had not traveled across half the galaxy to be polite. He was here to save lives, even if these people did not want to hear the truth. Xylara raised her hand again, and slowly the room quieted. She stared at Jake for a long moment, and he saw the wheels turning behind her eyes. She was young and arrogant, yes, but she was not stupid. That is quite a claim, Commander Morrison, she said softly. You stand in my throne room and tell me that my empire's finest military minds are wrong about our own defenses. Yes, Your Majesty, I do, Jake replied, because they're judging the threat based on traditional warfare. The swarm doesn't follow those rules. Xylara stared at the human commander for several long seconds. Around them, the nobles and advisors waited to see what their princess queen would do. Would she have this rude outsider thrown out? Would she punish him for his disrespect? Instead, Xylara surprised everyone. She turned to face the crowd of nobles and made a sharp gesture with her hand. Leave us. All of you. I wish to speak with Commander Morrison alone. The throne room filled with shocked whispers. The purple-robed nobleman opened his mouth to protest, but one look from Xylara silenced him. Slowly, reluctantly, the advisors and nobles filed out through the massive doors. Some cast angry glances back at Jake. Others looked worried. Lieutenant Rodriguez remained standing near the entrance. Xylara noticed her but said nothing. The young officer had proven she could be as still and silent as a statue when needed. When the last noble had gone and the doors closed with a deep boom, Xylara walked to a simple bench near the wall. She sat down and gestured for Jake to join her. He did, surprised by this sudden change in her behavior. Up close. Without the performance for her court, Xylara looked different. The arrogance was still there in her posture, but Jake could see something else now. Curiosity, maybe even concern. Now explain, she said simply. No audience, no politics. Just truth. Why should I believe that my empire is in danger? This was better. He could work with someone willing to listen, even if they started from a place of doubt. He pulled out his datapad and activated a hologram that floated in the air between them. This is Earth, he said. The hologram showed a blue and green planet spinning slowly. Our homeworld. It looks peaceful from space, doesn't it? Beautiful, even. But Earth taught humanity some hard lessons. He changed the image to show scenes from Earth's history. Armies clashing with primitive weapons. Cities burning. Mushroom clouds rising from nuclear explosions. Xylara's eyes widened at the destruction. For our entire existence we fought, Jake continued. We fought nature, fought each other, fought disease and hunger, and everything else you can imagine. We developed weapons that could kill millions in seconds. We came very close to destroying ourselves completely, multiple times. Why didn't you? Xylara asked quietly. Because enough people decided survival was worth fighting for, Jake said. Every time we came to the edge of extinction, someone found a way to pull us back. But those experiences left marks on us. Every human grows up learning about these wars. We study them in school. We remember them. We make sure our children remember them too. He shifted the hologram to show space battles. Human ships, smaller and less elegant than Keltheron vessels, fighting against various enemies. The combat looked brutal and desperate. When we reached the stars, we brought that history with us. We thought maybe out here, away from Earth, things would be different, but they weren't. The galaxy was just as dangerous as home, in different ways. Xylara leaned closer to study the hologram. Show me one of your battles. One of the 347? Jake thought for a moment, then pulled up a specific file. This is the Battle of New Dakota, 15 years ago. A colony ship carrying 30,000 civilians was attacked by pirates. 3 military cruisers against one old cargo freighter. The hologram showed the scene in detail. The massive colony ship drifted helplessly while 3 sleek pirate vessels closed in. Between them and their prey sat a single, battered freighter, small and insignificant. The freighter was called the Lucky Star, Jake said. Captain was a woman named Patricia Huang. She was 62 years old, had been hauling cargo across space for 40 years. She was days away from retirement. He watched Xylara's face as the story unfolded in the hologram. The pirates sent a demand. Surrender, or they would start killing passengers. 1 life every minute until the colony ship gave up. Patricia had a crew of 8 people, Jake continued. Her ship had 2 laser cutters meant for clearing space debris, not fighting. Against 3 warships, she had 0 chance of winning. Any military computer would have calculated her odds of survival at less than 1%. So what did she do? Xylar asked, though her eyes remained fixed on the hologram. She fought anyway, Jake said simply, because she knew if she surrendered, those 30,000 people would be enslaved or killed. So she decided that her life and the lives of her 8 crew members were worth trading for 30,000 others. The hologram showed the Lucky Star beginning to move. Despite being old and damaged, the ship moved with surprising grace. Patricia used her cargo containers as shields, positioning them between her ship and the pirates' weapons. Then she did something unexpected. She jettisoned 1 container directly at the nearest pirate ship. The pirates laughed and easily shot it down, but the explosion created a debris field that confused their sensors for precious seconds. In that time, Patricia fired her laser cutter through the debris cloud, through the pirate ship's weakened shields, and directly into their bridge. The pirate vessel spun out of control, systems failing. 1 down, 2 to go. How did she know where to aim? Xylara asked. She didn't, Jake replied. She guessed based on 40 years of flying in space. She knew how ships were built, where the weak points were. She gambled and won. That time. The battle continued. Patricia used every trick she knew. She vented atmosphere to create thrust when her engines were damaged. She used her remaining cargo containers as improvised weapons, filling one with mining explosives and ramming it into the second pirate ship, but the 3rd pirate vessel was learning from her tactics. It kept its distance and pounded the Lucky Star with long-range weapons. Patricia's ship was falling apart. Life support was failing, the hull was breached in a dozen places. She could have run, Jake said quietly. At this point, the colony ship had enough time to start charging its own engines. Patricia could have tried to escape, but she didn't. Instead, the hologram showed the Lucky Star making 1 final move. With the last of her power, Patricia aimed her ship directly at the remaining pirate vessel and engaged full thrust. The pirate tried to evade, but Patricia predicted the move. The 2 ships collided in a shower of metal and fire. When the Colonial Navy arrived 30 minutes later, they found the colony ship safe and unharmed. They found the wreckage of 3 pirate vessels. And they found the Lucky Star, drifting and silent, life support gone, but her mission complete. All 8 crew members had died with their captain. Jake closed the hologram. Xylara sat quietly, processing what she had seen. That's 1 battle, Jake said. 1 story out of 347 that I carry with me, and it wasn't even my battle. It was Patricia's, but I remember it. I honor it. Because that's what humanity does. We remember our fights, we learn from them, we pass the lessons down. Your people die a lot, Xylara observed. It wasn't cruel, just factual. Yes, Jake agreed. We die a lot, but we also survive a lot. Every battle that kills some of us teaches the rest of us how to survive the next one. Pain is a good teacher, Your Majesty. The best teacher. Your people haven't felt real pain in 200 years. That makes you vulnerable. Xylara stood and walked to the massive windows overlooking her capital city. Towers and spires stretched toward the sky, beautiful and pristine. Gardens filled with exotic plants. Citizens walking peacefully through clean streets. Everything was perfect and orderly. We've built a good civilization, she said softly. Our people are happy. They have art, science, culture. They don't know war, and I always thought that was something to be proud of. It is something to be proud of, Jake said, standing to join her at the window. Peace is always better than war. But peace doesn't last forever, no matter how much we want it to. The universe doesn't care about our desire for peace. Threats come whether we're ready or not. Tell me about the swarm, Xylara said. Not what your reports say. Tell me what you've seen with your own eyes." Jake's expression grew dark. He pulled up another file on his datapad, but hesitated before opening it. "What I'm about to show you is difficult to watch, but you need to see it to understand what's coming." "Show me." The hologram changed to show a planet from orbit. It looked similar to the view of her capital world that they could see through the window. Cities sparkled across the surface. Lights indicated millions of people going about their lives. "This is New Providence," Jake said. "Outer Rim Colony. Population 3 million. This recording is from 6 weeks ago." He pressed another control. "This is New Providence now." The image shifted to show the same planet, but transformed into something from a nightmare. The atmosphere was gone, stripped away completely. The surface was gray and dead. Where cities had once stood, massive organic structures now grew like diseased trees. They pulsed with a sickly green light, spreading across the planet like cancer. Zalara put her hand to her mouth. Even with all her royal training, she couldn't hide her shock. What happened to the people? "Consumed," Jake said flatly. "Every living thing on that planet was broken down by the swarm and absorbed. The biological matter was converted into more swarm creatures. The minerals and metals were extracted and used to grow their ships. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was left." He zoomed the image closer to show the organic structures in detail. They looked like they were breathing, expanding and contracting. "These are hive nodes. They grow on every planet the swarm takes. From these nodes, they birth new warriors, new ships, new tools for consumption." "How long did it take?" Zalara's voice was barely a whisper. 72 hours, Jake replied, "from the moment the swarm fleet arrived until the planet was completely consumed. 3 million people gone in 3 days. He changed the hologram again, this time showing space near the dead planet. Shapes began to appear on the display. At first there were just a few, then dozens, then hundreds, organic vessels that looked more like insects than ships. Each one was different, evolved for a specific purpose. Some were small and fast, others were massive, kilometers long, with mouths that could swallow smaller ships whole. "These are just the scout vessels," Jake said, "the ones that stay behind to guard the hive nodes. The main fleet moves on to the next target, always growing, always hungry." Zalara watched the alien ships move through space. They didn't fly in formations like proper military vessels. They swarmed, moving in chaotic patterns that somehow worked together perfectly. "How many ships are in the main fleet?" "Our last count was over 5,000 vessels," Jake answered. "But that number grows with every world they take. They consume the resources and build more ships from the biological material. The fleet that attacks you will be larger than the fleet that attacked the last world." Lieutenant Rodriguez spoke from her position near the door. "We tracked one hive ship for 3 months. When we first spotted it, the ship was maybe 200 meters long. By the time it reached its target, it had grown to over a kilometer. It was using material from space dust, asteroids, anything it could absorb along the way." Zalara turned away from the hologram. She looked out the window at her peaceful city again, but now Jake could see fear in her eyes. "Good. Fear was healthy. Fear kept you alive. Your advisors told you that your defenses were adequate," Jake said. "Let me show you what happened when someone else thought that." This time it showed a massive fleet of beautiful silver ships. They moved in perfect formation, their shields shimmering like soap bubbles in the sun. "The Orion Confederation," Jake explained, "one of the most advanced civilizations in this part of the galaxy. When the swarm approached their territory, they sent 200 ships to stop them, state-of-the-art vessels with shields that could withstand the blast from a dying star. Energy weapons that could cut through a moon. The pride of their military? The hologram showed the Orion fleet engaging the swarm. At first it looked like a victory. The silver ship's weapons tore through swarm vessels. The shields held against the organic projectiles and acid sprays the enemy used. But then something changed. The swarm ships that were destroyed released clouds of spores. These spores attached to the Orion shields and began to grow. Within minutes, the shields were covered in organic matter that ate through the energy barriers like acid through cloth. "The swarm adapts," Jake said. "Every weapon you use, every defense you have, they learn to counter it. The Orions realized this too late." Quote, "The hologram showed the Orion ships beginning to fall, first 1, then 5, then dozens. The perfect formation broke apart into chaos. Ships tried to retreat, but the swarm was faster, surrounding them, pulling them down like sharks attacking wounded prey. They lost 160 ships before they managed to escape," Jake said. "And the swarm learned everything about Orion technology from the ships they captured. The next time the Orions face them, their weapons will be even less effective." "So what you're telling me is that we can't win, that no matter what we do, This swarm will adapt and overcome our defenses. No, Jake said firmly. I'm telling you that you can't fight them the way you've been taught to fight. Traditional military tactics won't work. Pretty formations and textbook strategies will get you killed. You need to fight like humanity fights. Dirty, unpredictable, willing to sacrifice and adapt faster than the enemy can. This one showed a much smaller human fleet facing swarm vessels. The human ships were battered and scarred, nothing like the elegant vessels the Keltherans built. This is the Battle of Redemption Point, Jake said, 3 months ago. The swarm hit the colony of New Seattle. We had 2 cruisers and maybe 40 fighter craft, against a swarm fleet of over 2,000 vessels. Xylara studied the impossible odds. You lost. We should have lost, Jake corrected. By every calculation, we should have been wiped out in the first hour. And we did lose both cruisers early in the battle. But the fighter squadrons kept fighting. The hologram showed small human fighters darting between the massive swarm ships. They moved erratically, never following predictable patterns. Some fighters worked together, others broke off alone. There was no formation, no obvious strategy. It looked like chaos. One pilot, Lisa Grant, noticed something, Jake continued. She saw that all the swarm ships near her were responding to threats at the exact same moment, like they were all receiving the same orders simultaneously. She realized they were controlled by a central hive mind, a node ship somewhere in the fleet. The hologram zoomed in on a single fighter, already burning from multiple hits. The ship's hull was breached in places. It should have retreated, should have tried to escape. Instead, it accelerated directly into the heart of the swarm fleet. Grant's fighter was dying, Jake said quietly. She had maybe 2 minutes before life support failed completely, so she used those 2 minutes to save 800,000 people. The hologram showed Grant's fighter weaving through enemy fire, taking hit after hit but refusing to stop. Finally, she reached a massive pulsing structure at the center of the swarm formation, the node ship. She rammed it at full speed, Jake said. Her fighter's reactor went critical on impact. The explosion destroyed the node ship and cut off the hive mind's control. Without their central coordination, the swarm fleet fell into confusion. Ships collided with each other. The organized attack became a disorganized mess. The remaining human fighters pressed their advantage, and the swarm eventually retreated. Lisa Grant saved that colony, Jake said, but she died doing it. She was 26 years old. She had a husband and a baby daughter back on Earth. She knew she wouldn't see them again, and she made the choice anyway. Xylara was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but sad. How many Lisa Grants does humanity have? How many people willing to die for strangers? All of us, Jake replied simply. Every human knows that sometimes survival requires sacrifice. We don't like it. We don't celebrate it, but we accept it as reality. That's the difference between your people and mine, Your Majesty. You've forgotten that freedom has a price. We never have. Xylara walked slowly back to her throne, but did not sit. Instead, she stood beside it, one hand resting on the armrest. Jake could see her mind working, processing everything he had shown her. The arrogance from earlier was completely gone now, replaced by the careful thought of a leader facing a real crisis. If I believe you, she said slowly, and I'm not saying I do yet, but if I believe you, what exactly are you proposing? That the Keltharan Empire throw away 200 years of military tradition and learn to fight like humans? That's exactly what I'm proposing. My admirals will never accept it. The military council will fight me on every change. The nobles will call it madness. Then you'll need to show them, Jake replied. Not with words or reports, with reality. Let me take you and your senior commanders to see the swarm threat up close. Let them see what I've seen. Then they can decide if tradition is worth dying for. Xylara considered this. Her fingers drummed against the throne's armrest, a nervous habit that probably annoyed her tutors when she was younger. Finally, she nodded. 3 days from now, I'll arrange for my flagship and senior staff. You'll take us to see this dead world of yours. But Commander Morrison, if this is some kind of trick or deception, you'll spend the rest of your very short life in a Keltharan prison? Fair enough, Jake said. 3 days later, Jake stood on the command deck of the Keltharan flagship Radiant Dawn. The ship was everything he expected from Keltharan engineering. Beautiful curved walls that seemed to glow with their own light. Control stations that looked more like works of art than military equipment. Everything was clean and polished and perfect. It made Jake uncomfortable. A ship this pretty had never seen real combat. He could tell from how the crew moved, how they operated their stations. They were well-trained and professional, but they had the confidence of people who had never been truly tested. Princess Queen Xylara stood on the observation deck, wearing practical traveling clothes instead of her royal robes. Beside her was Admiral Varix, an older Keltheron with silver skin and cold eyes. He had made his opinion of Jake very clear during the brief introduction. The Admiral thought humans were primitive warmongers, and this entire trip was a waste of time. Several other senior officers and nobles completed the observation group. They talked quietly among themselves, casting occasional glances at Jake and Lieutenant Rodriguez. "We're approaching the coordinates now, Your Majesty," the helmsman announced. His voice carried the bored tone of someone performing routine duties. "Bring us out of faster-than-light travel," Admiral Varix ordered. The ship dropped back into normal space, and the main view screen activated. For several seconds there was silence, then someone gasped. Another person made a choking sound. One young officer turned away and looked like he might be sick. The dead world of New Providence filled the screen. Even worse than in the hologram, the reality of it was overwhelming. The planet hung in space like a corpse, gray and lifeless. The organic structures covering its surface pulsed and writhed, clearly visible even from orbit. "By the ancestors," Admiral Varix whispered. All his earlier contempt was gone, replaced by horror. "This is what the swarm does," Jake said quietly. "This is what's coming for your worlds if we don't stop them." A young noble, a woman in green robes, stepped closer to the screen. "Were there really 3 million people down there?" "Yes," Jake confirmed. "Families, children. Scientists, farmers, teachers, artists. All gone. Consumed and converted into biological material for the swarm." The tactical officer suddenly spoke up, his voice urgent. "Admiral, I'm detecting movement on the surface. Multiple contacts rising from the hive structures." On the screen, shapes began lifting from the dead planet. First dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. The swarm ships rose like a swarm of locusts, each one hungry and aggressive. "Those are the garrison fleet," Jake explained, his voice calm despite the danger. "They guard the hive nodes and attack anything that gets too close. There are probably 2,000 vessels down there." "Battle stations," Admiral Varix commanded. Throughout the ship, alarms began to sound. The Keltheran crew moved quickly to their positions, but Jake could see the fear in their movements. This was real. This was actually happening. "We should retreat immediately," one of the nobles said, his voice high with panic. "We're not equipped for a battle of this size." "We're not here to fight them," Jake said. "We're here to observe. Helmsman, begin moving us back slowly. Don't make any aggressive moves. The swarm responds to threats." The radiant dawn began to back away from the planet. The swarm ships continued rising but didn't pursue. They formed a defensive sphere around their hive world, protecting their prize. "They're not chasing us," Xylara observed. "Why?" "Because we're not threatening the hive," Lieutenant Rodriguez explained. "The swarm's primary goal is consumption and growth. They'll defend what they've taken, but they won't waste resources on targets that aren't interfering with that goal. It's efficient." "Efficient," Admiral Varix repeated bitterly. "They've turned conquest into a biological process. There's no honor in it, no strategy, just mindless consumption." "Don't mistake their nature for mindlessness," Jake warned. "The swarm is very intelligent. It learns, adapts, plans. It's just that its plans operate on a different scale than ours. While you're thinking about individual battles, the swarm is thinking about consuming entire sectors of space." He pulled up his datapad and projected new tactical information into the air. "Based on their current trajectory and consumption rate, the swarm will reach your outer colonies in approximately 6 months. They'll reach your core worlds, including this capital, in 8 to 10 months. The observation deck fell silent as everyone absorbed this information. 8 months. Less than a year before the nightmare they were witnessing arrived at their doorstep. "What are our odds of stopping them with conventional tactics?" Xylara asked. Her voice was steady, but Jake could hear the tension underneath. "Honestly, less than 5%, Jake replied. "Your ships are powerful and your crews are skilled, but you fight like every other civilized species, with formations and protocols and rules of engagement. The swarm doesn't follow those rules. They'll overwhelm you with numbers, adapt to your weapons, and consume your fleets. Then teach us," Xylara said suddenly. Every head turned to look at her. "You said humanity knows how to fight these creatures. You said we need to learn to fight like humans. Then teach us. Show my military how to survive." Admiral Varix looked shocked. "Your Majesty, surely you're not suggesting we abandon centuries of military tradition based on the words of one human?" "I'm suggesting we abandon tradition before tradition gets us all killed," Xylara shot back. Her voice carried an edge of command that silenced any further objections. "Look at that planet, Admiral. Look at what's coming for us. Do you really think our parade formations and ceremonial tactics will save us? The Admiral had no answer. He looked at the dead world on the screen, at the thousands of swarm ships circling it like vultures. Finally, he bowed his head slightly. What would you have us do, Your Majesty? Commander Morrison, I'm placing the training of my military forces under your supervision. You have 8 months to turn my people into warriors. Whatever you need, whatever resources, whatever authority, you'll have it, but you must succeed. The survival of my empire depends on it. Jake felt the weight of that responsibility settle on his shoulders. 8 months to change an entire military culture. 8 months to teach people who had known only peace how to fight a war for survival. It seemed impossible. But humanity specialized in impossible tasks. I'll need complete authority over training protocols, Jake said. No interference from traditionalists or politicians. My methods will seem harsh, maybe even cruel. Your people will hate me before this is over. I don't need them to love you, Xylara replied. I need them to survive. Can you do this? Jake looked at Lieutenant Rodriguez. She gave him a small nod. They had trained colonial militias before, turned farmers and miners into soldiers, but never on this scale, never with this much at stake. We can do it, Jake said. But you need to understand something, Your Majesty. Training warriors isn't about teaching tactics or weapon systems. It's about changing how people think. We'll have to break down everything your military believes about combat and rebuild it from the ground up. Some people will make it through the training. Some will quit. Others will fail. Are you prepared for that? Xylara met his gaze without flinching. I'm prepared to do whatever it takes to save my people. Even if it means they have to suffer first. The transformation began the very next day. Jake stood in the largest military training facility on the Keltheran capital world, watching hundreds of officers and soldiers file in. They wore crisp uniforms with perfectly polished insignia. Their boots gleamed. Their posture was parade ground perfect. They looked like they were ready for an inspection, not a war. That was going to change. Listen up. Jake's voice echoed across the training ground. The Keltherans snapped to attention, their movements synchronized and precise. Too precise. Everything you learned in military academy is now worthless. Every formation, every tactic, every rule of engagement, forget it all. Starting today, you learn to fight the way humans fight. The way people who want to survive fight. A murmur ran through the assembled soldiers. Some looked offended. Others looked confused. A few looked scared, which Jake counted as a good sign. Fear meant they understood the stakes. Lieutenant Rodriguez stepped forward with a group of human trainers. There were only 30 humans total to train thousands of Keltherans, but they would have to make it work. You will be divided into squads of 10, she announced. Each squad will have a human advisor. You will train 18 hours a day. You will learn small unit tactics, improvised weapons, zero-gravity combat, survival skills, and most importantly, you will learn to think like warriors instead of soldiers. What's the difference? A Keltheran officer called out. Soldiers follow orders and execute plans, Jake replied. Warriors survive. When your plan falls apart, when your commanders are dead, when everything goes wrong, warriors find a way to keep fighting. That's what we're going to teach you. The training was brutal. Jake pushed the Keltheran troops harder than they had ever been pushed. He created scenarios where they had to make impossible choices, situations where following protocol would get them killed, exercises where improvisation was the only path to survival. Many failed at first. Officers who had spent decades learning proper procedures couldn't adapt to chaos. Soldiers who had never faced real danger froze when confronted with simulated combat. Some quit. Others were removed from combat training and reassigned to support roles. But some surprised everyone, including themselves. A young Keltheran named Finn, barely 20 years old, showed natural talent for tactical thinking. Didn't have the most experience or the best scores from Academy. But when Jake threw him into a simulated ambush with no preparation, Finn kept his squad alive through quick thinking and aggressive action. Where did you learn to fight like that? Jake asked him after one particularly successful exercise. Finn looked embarrassed. I didn't, sir. I just did what felt right. When the enemy came at us, I stopped thinking about procedures and just reacted. That's exactly right, Jake said. Keep doing that. Trust your instincts. They'll save your life more often than a manual ever will. Meanwhile, Admiral Varix was learning similar lessons in the fleet training exercises. Jake had convinced the Princess Queen to let him restructure the entire naval combat doctrine. The beautiful formations that the Keltharan fleet practiced were replaced with aggressive, unpredictable attack patterns. At first it was a disaster. Ships collided because they weren't used to moving independently. Captains hesitated, waiting for orders that Jake deliberately didn't give. Simulated battles ended with the Keltherin fleet destroyed again and again, but slowly, painfully, they began to improve. Captains learned to make decisions without waiting for permission. Crews learned to operate under fire. The fleet started to move like a pack of predators rather than a ceremonial parade. 6 months into training, Jake received word that a real swarm scout force had been detected entering Keltherin space. They had attacked a border world called Carthax. The Third Fleet, which had been training under Jake's methods, was the closest force available to respond. "This is it," Xylara said. She stood with Jake in the military command center, watching the tactical displays. "This is where we learn if your training actually works." "It will work," Jake said with more confidence than he felt. "Your people have learned fast." "They're ready." The Third Fleet jumped to Carthax and engaged the swarm. Jake and Xylara watched through live feeds transmitted from the flagship. The battle was nothing like the elegant naval engagements that Keltherin historians would have recognized. It was violent, chaotic, and desperate. Keltherin ships threw aside decades of doctrine and fought with the savage efficiency Jake had taught them. When a swarm vessel got too close, captains rammed it rather than trying to maneuver away. When conventional weapons proved ineffective, they improvised, using everything from cargo containers to reactor overloads as weapons. Admiral Varix led from the front, his flagship taking damage that would have sent traditional commanders into retreat. But he held the line. When his weapons failed, he ordered his crew to vent atmosphere toward enemy ships, using the frozen air as improvised shrapnel. A swarm bioship tried to board one of the Keltherin cruisers. Instead of panicking, the crew sealed the boarding zone and vented it into space, taking the swarm warriors with it. Then they opened fire on the bioship at point-blank range. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it ended, the Third Fleet had lost 30 ships. But they had destroyed the entire swarm scout force. Not a single swarm vessel escaped. Admiral Varix's voice came through on the command channel, rough with exhaustion and emotion. "Commander Morrison, your training saved us today. We fought like demons. We fought like humans. And we won. You fought like warriors, Admiral. Your ancestors would be proud." But everyone in the command center knew this was just the beginning. The scout force was tiny compared to what was coming. The main swarm fleet was still approaching, growing larger with every world it consumed. Xylara turned to Jake. "We won one battle, but the real war is still coming. Are we ready?" "We're more ready than you were 8 months ago," Jake replied honestly. "But the truth is, no one is ever completely ready for war. You just have to be ready enough to survive it." Every available ship was armed and crewed. Every soldier received combat training. Civilian evacuation plans were created for the core worlds. Defensive platforms were built in orbit. The entire empire mobilized for war. Jake pushed himself as hard as he pushed everyone else. He reviewed battle plans until his eyes burned. He trained with the troops until his body ached. He knew that when the swarm arrived, every decision he had made, every tactic he had taught, would be tested. Lieutenant Rodriguez found him late one night in the training facility, reviewing footage of the day's exercises. "You should sleep," she said. "You're no good to anyone if you collapse from exhaustion." "I'll sleep when this is over," Jake replied. "When the swarm is defeated, or we're all dead. Whichever comes first." "You really think we can win?" Rodriguez asked quietly. 347 moments when death seemed certain, but somehow he had survived. He thought about Patricia Huang and her cargo ship, about Lisa Grant and her final sacrifice, about every human who had ever faced impossible odds and kept fighting anyway. "I think we have a chance," he said. "And sometimes a chance is all you need." Long-range sensors detected the main swarm fleet entering Keltherin space. 5,000 vessels, each one hungry for consumption. The fleet moved like a living thing flowing through space toward the Keltherin core worlds. Every ship in the Keltherin Navy moved to intercept. Human battle groups from the Terran Coalition joined them, adding their scarred and battered vessels to the defense. On the ground, millions of soldiers prepared for the possibility that the fleet battle would fail and the swarm would reach the surface. Jake stood on the bridge of the Radiant Dawn beside Princess Queen Xylara. She had insisted on commanding the fleet personally, much to her advisor's horror. But she had argued that if her people were willing to die for the Empire, she should be willing to lead them. "All ships report ready," Admiral Varix announced. His voice was calm, but Jake could hear the tension underneath. This was it. Everything they had trained for, everything they had prepared for, came down to this moment. "Then let's show the swarm what happens when they threaten the Keltherin Empire," Xylara said. She looked at Jake. And let's show the galaxy what happens when humanity teaches others to fight. The swarm fleet arrived like a wave of locusts. They didn't slow down or form up. They just came, thousands of organic ships swarming forward with mindless hunger. All ships, engage at will, Zilara commanded. Remember your training. Fight smart, fight hard, and fight to survive. The combined fleet moved forward to meet them. Keltheron ships and human vessels fought side by side, using every tactic Jake had taught them. They didn't fight fair. They didn't follow traditional rules of engagement. They fought like their lives depended on it, because they did.